My name is Chloe. I am 55 years old and a part-time housewife. My son is 28 years old and an office worker. He is a very sweet boy and we live a very happy life without any problems. Before I tell you about my ex-husband, let me tell you about my childhood. I think it will help you understand my feelings better. The problem was my father. He was usually a taciturn person, but when he had a drink, he became a different person. Suddenly his attitude became loud, and he even started telling stories of his past. I was on the baseball team in high school and I once yelled at a senior who wasn't polite to me. My mother replied, "Your father's story is a lie. He was really a petty person who was always petulant toward the seniors." My father kept forcing me and my mother to listen to him, but I was tired of hearing the same story over and over again. "Dad, I heard that story earlier." "It's your father's story. Listen seriously," and he hit me sometimes. My mother tried her best to protect me, but I was so scared. I explained that my father was a quiet man, but he just couldn't say what he wanted to say. He was the type of person who, when alcohol was involved, all the stress he usually accumulated would come out at once. I married him when I was 20, but then I soon found out he had a drinking problem. I wasn't a good judge of men. My mother lamented. My father also cheated on my mother many times when he was drunk. "You cheated on me again, didn't you?" "Shut up. I don't care if it's just a little bit." My mother had reached the end of her patience and divorced when I was in junior high school. My mother raised me with all her might, and I vowed to take my father as my role model and live a serious life. I studied hard, went to college, and started working part-time at a restaurant to help my mother financially. Incidentally, my father passed away when I was 20 years old. He was 40 years old, and it was said that he had a physical injury from drinking too much alcohol. He had cheated on his wife so much and had a woman, but in his last days he died without anyone to take care of him. My ex-husband was a full-time employee and taught me his job, which is how we became friends. My ex-husband was a dependable person and even helped me when I got involved with a strange customer. He sent me away with the words, "Don't mess with my valued employee." I was very happy about that, and I gradually became attracted to him. My ex-husband never drank alcohol, was always mild-mannered, and always had a smile on his face. He seemed to be the complete opposite of my father, so I began to want to date him. After my part-time job, I told him that go home with me, and that's when I confessed my feelings to him. I thought he might not take me seriously because of the age difference, but my ex-husband seemed happy. "I like you too, Chloe, let's go out." When he said yes, I was elated. Let's continue the story. My relationship with my ex-husband was going well, and we got married when I was 25. Unlike my father, whom I hated, he was not a bad drinker and never cheated on me. We were married at different ages, but my ex-husband was not an old-fashioned person, and I didn't think age mattered. He was very understanding of my busy work schedule. 2 years after our marriage, our son was born, and fortunately, my ex-husband was very supportive of the housework and childcare. "This house belongs to me and Chloe, and our son is our child too, so I'll help you." "Thank you, we'll get through this together." After such a conversation, I made up my mind to become a parent. My ex-husband was a pretty good at household and a good cook. "How are you so good at cooking?" Actually, my mother had been teaching me how to cook since I was a child. I see. She told me I should be able to do it in case I ever lived on my own. I was grateful to my mother-in-law. My parents-in-law and my husband had a good relationship and they were kind to me. Before we got married, I was worried about wife-mother-in-law problems, but our family was so far away from such problems. When I went to visit my parents-in-law, they would say to me, "You must be going through a lot, aren't you? Take these with you." My mother-in-law gave me a lot of foodstuffs and snacks. I remember I was grateful because it saved me the trouble of shopping. My son grew up well. He laughed a lot, and I can't tell you how many times I was healed by his smile. My ex-husband took an active role in raising our child, so my workload must have been less than in other families. Thanks to him, I was able to concentrate on the work I loved. I was happy to have married this man, and my ex-husband was definitely a good dad on the side. I had no doubt in my mind that we were a good family. We lived in a rented apartment before the birth of our child, but when the baby was born, we bought our own home. The house was about a 15-minute walk from my parents' house, so my mother came to visit often. My mother took care of my son and reduced the burden on my husband and me. He's my grandson. I'll make sure he's well taken care of. Chloe, you can rest easy and go about your business. She said this and happily played with my son. My mother came every day, and I was worried that my ex-husband might be depressed. However, my ex-husband and my mother were relatively close in age, so they seemed to have a lot in common, and they quickly became friends. My back has been hurting lately. I have some good compresses. I'll give some to you. Really? Thank you. The conversation made me smile. However, when my son turned 5 years old, I had to go on a business trip to a distant place for work. The duration of the trip was 6 months, and I had to live at the destination for the entire time. I was anxious about leaving my young son behind, but it was a challenging job and I did not want to turn it down. When I talked to my mother and my ex-husband about it, they easily allowed me to go on the business trip. I want Chloe to do whatever you want to. Even though you are a mother, you don't have to bear your feel. They sent me off and I went on my business trip with gratitude. I was truly reassured that those two would be fine. I was so busy during the 6 months of the business trip that I didn't have time to contact my ex-husband. Even so, I managed to get some work done, and the business trip ended after 6 months as planned. On the day I was to return home, I was very excited. I was looking forward to seeing my family for the first time in a long time. Even though I hadn't been able to contact them, not a single day goes by that I don't miss them. I had been working hard, looking forward to seeing my family, and I couldn't wait to see them. But when I returned home, only my son was there. "Hey, where's your father?" I asked him, and he gave me a shocking answer. "He left about a week ago." "What? Because I couldn't believe it and went to my husband's room to find that all of his belongings were gone and the place was deserted. It seemed that what my son was saying was true. I panicked and called my parents-in-laws. I hoped they might know something, but when my mother-in-law answered the phone and said, "It's true that he's gone. I don't know anything," I couldn't get any useful information. My father-in-law also had no idea where my ex-husband was. I then contacted my ex-husband's workplace, but he resigned about 2 weeks ago for family reasons. I ended up coming up empty, only to be told by a coworker he was usually a serious person and there were no suspicious pretenses at all. I contacted every other place I could think of, but all in vain. Even my mother, who was with my ex-husband, just said, "I don't know anything." The only thing I found out was that a large sum of money had been withdrawn from my ex-husband's bank account. I believed that it must have been some kind of bad dream and that my ex-husband would come back, but after 3 days he still hadn't returned. I finally went to the police to file a missing persons report, but the officers wouldn't take it up. I think he just ran away from home because of marital differences. There is no case to be made. That was what they told me, and they did not conduct a full-scale investigation. I was very depressed and shed tears. I felt hopeless, wondering where on earth I could turn to if the police would not help. I reported this to my mother, who came to check on me. "The police are terrible. There was never any difference between us, but they didn't even do a good job of investigating." When I complained about this, my mother said in a strangely light tone, "Oh, that's what you say, but maybe he got tired of you doing nothing but working." That's not true. He understood my work. When I retorted, my mother continued, "No husband would be truly happy if his wife had been away from home for 6 months." I was flabbergasted when she said that. I had to admit that it was true. If I were in my ex-husband's side, I might not like it. I wondered if my ex-husband had been frustrated in some way that I was unaware of. I wondered vaguely about that. "Well, your ex-husband is alive somewhere. Take this opportunity to spend more time with your son. I'm moving out too, so I won't be able to help you." I was puzzled by my mother's sudden announcement that we were moving. "What, my ex-husband is gone too, and now you too?" "I've been raising children since I was young, and I'm tired. I just want to take a break." When she said that, I couldn't disagree. My mother had had a hard time after giving birth to me at the age of 20, so I couldn't ask her to help me by pushing herself too hard. A week after my ex-husband's disappearance, my mother sold the house they had lived in for years and moved out for real. I didn't get her new address, her phone number seemed to have changed, and I had no idea where she was. Unlike today, there weren't many ways to contact her, so it was difficult to find her. I thought it was a little strange too, but in my confused state, I had lost my cool thinking at the time. I assumed that since my mother had struggled since she was young, she wanted me to live freely, and that she had arranged for me to spend time with my son. My mother was such a good, hard-working person that it never occurred to me that she had any ill intentions. Despite the shock of my ex-husband's disappearance, I decided to prioritize my family and spend more time with my son. However, my son's expression became darker and darker every year after my ex-husband disappeared. It was only natural since his father had disappeared. My son was so listless in everything he did that I was worried about him. I encouraged him by saying, "Your father will be back soon," and I tried to act as cheerful as possible in front of my son. Even so, my son was losing his energy because my ex-husband was not coming home. I wanted him to come home soon for my son's sake. In the end, 20 years later, I still hadn't found my ex-husband. I looked everywhere that seemed even remotely possible, but no progress. I shouldn't have done nothing but work. I should have talked things over with my ex-husband. All I could think of was regret. I even cried in sadness, wondering if my ex-husband was no longer in this world. Around that time, I started social networking. I knew that there were people looking for people on SNS, and I looked at it for the first time, clinging to straws. Then I found an account called Matthew. I think I probably found out about it from a recommended user or something, but I forgot the details. The problem was its content. It was a so-called bitchy account, and he was constantly bad-mouthing his wife and parents to the point where it's hesitated to write about it here. I thought I had seen something bad, but at the same time I noticed something strange. Matthew had posted a message saying that he had moved about 20 years ago. Moreover, the wording was similar to that of my ex-husband. But I ignored it because I was convinced that anyone would move and that my ex-husband was not the kind of person who would do such a thing. One day I decided to discuss my ex-husband with my now 23-year-old son. I thought we should discuss the fact that my ex-husband might not be coming back and what we would do together from now on. During the discussion, my son looked serious and even seemed determined to do something. Then, at the opening of the discussion, he said something I couldn't believe. Actually, I met my dad at the convenience store yesterday. And Dad, he's cheating on you. What? I couldn't believe my son's statement, but he looked so serious that I couldn't believe he was joking. Is that true? Isn't that a mistake? No, he was getting older, but his face was definitely my father. When I was stunned in disbelief, my son continued. After he disappeared, he came to see me several times. The first time I saw him was when I was 20 years old. He told me then that he had left home to live with someone he was having an affair with. Yesterday, he said he was still with her. Oh no, I can't believe he's cheating on me. I couldn't believe it. That's how good my ex-husband was. My son continued. He wants to live with me. He asked me for money, so I guess he's after money. He took me to his house and tried to convince me with expensive sweets, but of course I refused. Well, and that was all I could say. I was so shocked that I couldn't think straight. My ex-husband must have long lost all love for his family to beg his son for money. Maybe he never had any in the first place. As I lay there thinking these thoughts, I was brought back to reality by my son's voice. I know who my father is having an affair with. I met him when I went over to his house. Who is that? I didn't want to ask, but I had to know sooner or later. I was ready. My son hesitated for a moment before opening his mouth. My grandmother. Both my dad and grandma said it was an affair, so I'm sure. To my surprise, the person with whom he was having an affair was my mother. I froze. Later, my son told me that I had been in a state of shock for almost half an hour. I finally came to my senses, and my son shook me by the shoulders and told me the details. He told me that he had started to see my grandmother, who was close to his age, as an object of romantic interest. He told me that when Mom was away on a business trip for 6 months, he confessed his feelings for her and decided to move out and live with her. I felt dizzy and almost collapsed, but I managed to stay conscious. When I was a kid, my dad actually told me that my grandma was going to be my new mom. She was going to leave your current mother and the 3 of us would live together. I couldn't believe he was telling my 5-year-old son about that. I could not hide my shock. I didn't want to leave my mom, so I refused, but my dad got angry. "Maybe that's why you left, Dad." "Yeah," he said, "you are not my son," and left. He was crying a little, perhaps remembering what had happened. It was impossible for him not to be hurt when his father said that to him. I knew I had to tell my mother. "But you love my father, don't you, Mom? I thought it would hurt you if I told you about this. And my father wouldn't let me say anything about it. But I've come to my senses." I was filled with apology, knowing that I had made my son feel uncomfortable. I finally realized that I had been tormenting my son for decades, even though I was his parent, because I had foolishly trusted my ex-husband. The 20 years since my ex-husband disappeared were very long. It felt like an endless series of heavy and painful days. Even I, an adult, was in so much pain. My son must have been in even more pain. He must have been suffering alone, holding on to a secret that he couldn't tell anyone. The images of my father and my ex-husband finally overlapped in my mind, and I began to feel intense anger toward my ex-husband. I immediately reported this to my parents-in-laws, and they were both extremely angry. My son remembered my ex-husband's house, so he showed me around and we all had to go there. Yeah, it was yesterday today, so fortunately they hadn't even moved in. I rang the intercom and my mother answered, and I caught a glimpse of my ex-husband. My mom panicked and tried to close the door, but I forced my way into the house and yelled at everyone. I was so excited I don't even remember what I said. Apparently my ex-husband and my mother had been moving from one place to another for 20 years. I'm sure they must have had a great time living there. When my ex-husband realized that I knew the truth, he began to ramble on about his past without taking offense. The details are the same as what my son told me, so I won't go into them here. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to be sorry. "I'm sorry, I was out of my mind." My mother raised me as a single woman and was unable to fall in love as a woman. I know she sacrificed herself all her life, but even taking that into consideration, my anger toward my mother did not subside. I was even more angry at my ex-husband, who seemed to have no problem with it. I yelled at him that I would charge him alimony, and decided to leave for now. It was late at night, and we decided to discuss the details at a later date. On the appointed day, I went to my mother's house with my ex-husband and found no one there. I waited for about an hour, but they still didn't come back. I went back another day, but still no one was there, so I asked the neighbors and they told me that they seemed to have moved out. They had escaped again. My guts were churning. No wonder the phone lines were down and they hadn't been to my parents-in-law's house. Everyone was beyond angry and stunned, and I was at my wits' end again. When I thought about going to the police, I suddenly remembered Matthew too. I knew what my ex-husband really was and suspected that Matthew was my ex-husband, so I didn't hesitate to look at his postings. Then he said he moved out again, and my suspicions ended in conviction. As I went through the posts, I saw that he had posted a picture of his new house, which I thought he was dumb. I guess he was confident he would never be found. I smiled when I found the proof. He had also posted information about other stores in the neighborhood, so I was able to determine his address to some extent. I called my parents-in-laws again, thinking that there was no need for the police. We all did a little searching and found the new house of my ex-husband and his cheating partner. I thought, what if they come here and it's someone else, but at the right moment, my ex-husband and my mother appeared at the door. I remember they even had their arms around each other and looked like they were having fun. I was shaking with anger and stormed over to my ex-husband and mother. "How dare you run away? How did you know where I was?" Matthew told me everything. My ex-husband's face grew pale, and my mother was speechless and stunned. I forced them both to go to my parents-in-law's house to be monitored by them. They finally felt remorse after living with no freedom at all. They were sanctioned and my ex-husband was insulated by my parents-in-law. My parents-in-laws told him that they could no longer trust him because of all the terrible name-calling he had done on social media and the current turmoil he had caused. I decided to get a divorce and cut ties with my mother as well. And my son agreed with me. I told him how much I and my son had suffered at that time. I think we talked for about 2 hours. Anyway, I told them how I felt for the past 20 years. They both realized that they had made a huge mistake. My ex-husband told me this. I couldn't control myself, and I was venting my stress the wrong way. I am truly sorry. My ex-husband bowed deeply. He finally apologized seriously, but I could not understand his thoughts, and my anger and pain did not disappear. That's how hard it was for me. But then another incident happened. My mother seemed to have taken my story too seriously, and a week later she committed suicide. I didn't want her to atone in this way. I regretted blaming her too much, but the people around me comforted me, saying it was not your fault. But the shock of losing my own mother was bigger than I expected, and I was stunned for about 2 days. By the way, my ex-husband is now living alone and lonely after losing his affair partner, and rumor has it that he looks very old for his age. He was in financial trouble because he was begging for his son's money, but the alimony made it even harder for him. On top of that, he got addicted to gambling because of the stress and is now living in debt. Moreover, he has cut off all his friends at once because this incident has spread among his acquaintances, so I guess he is having a hard time living without any allies. I, on the other hand, had been dragging this incident out for a while and had been blocked up for a long time. Too many things happened, and I couldn't sort out my mind. But my son was kind to me. He listened to me for hours and did all the housework. He once gently told me, "You can cry as much as you want." I am still grateful for his concern. And as I went on trips for a change of pace, my heart gradually recovered. Eventually, I came to realize that I couldn't keep dragging it out forever, so I started working part-time. I am now completely recovered in lives with my son, supporting each other. Every day is fulfilling and enjoyable. From now on, I want to live my life to the fullest.